What's going on, guys? Thanks for joining us for this great interview. We have Sam Wholley, registered dietitian at Tampa General Hospital here locally. She's going to talk about diet, exercise, nutrition, all kind of good stuff. She's also a proprietor with Graze, Savor, Grow. We're going to include that information in our bio, and we hope that you guys get a lot out of this interview. So thanks for coming on the show, Sam.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Thanks for joining us.
As you know, like we talk about diet and lifestyle on our show a lot, and we try to give some good, valid research on certain foods or certain, lifestyle things, I guess, that might help prevent some issues guys face with men's health. And we've talked a lot about obesity, and as Stephen knows, but how would somebody determine what a healthy weight is for them? And is there a way to calculate it themselves? I know there's BMI calculators on the internet. Sometimes that's accurate depending on how much muscle you have. But what would you say is a way for someone to determine a healthy weight and so on and so forth?
So that's not necessarily like an easy question to answer. It's a loaded question because a healthy weight is going to differ from person to person. So as a general statement, I can say like your healthy weight is when you are not restricting like any one sort of food, you're participating in like active, joyful movement. And if you have chronic diseases, they're under control. So our bodies typically have this range called like a set point weight range of like where they feel comfortable. So no matter what you do, your body's going to try to get you to that set point weight range, and everybody's is different. So yes, there's equations to predict like what a healthy weight is for you or how much calories you should be taking a day, but the research shows us that those are only like within 1% of accuracy. So your body's a really good regulator at like knowing how many calories you need. BMI per se isn't my favorite measure. You kind of hit on it a little bit, Patrick. It doesn't take into account muscle mass, but also the BMI equation, or like, how there's like underweight, normal, overweight, obese. So the equation backing that was actually created by like a mathematician, a European mathematician who was interested in kind of figuring out what the ideal man was. So that doesn't take into account, body diversity at all. And also the ranges that are used were originally different numbers. They were basically changed so that they would be like easier to remember, so that insurance companies could, say this person is overweight or this person is obese, and that puts them at a higher risk for this disease, so that their like health insurance would go up, which we don't always, like the research isn't clear that our weight is always indicative of us developing chronic diseases.
Okay, that's very interesting. I knew that there was probably some loopholes there. It was a little too easy just to punch in some numbers and be like, oh, you're healthy. And
yeah.
I have a little bit of a history in, powerlifting and weightlifting and stuff back in the day. And you add a lot of muscle mass and it doesn't really, you might register as obese on the BMI, but you're really not. I mean, you're pretty fit.
I've been clinically obese since I was like 15 years old. Whenever I go to the doctor,
Yeah.
so I was really what the hell is this thing measuring? And the more I got used to understanding it in pharmacy school, I was like, okay, this doesn't seem that accurate. I mean, I know I don't know if do they still use it for TPN calculation? I know you do a lot of that in the neonates, but
yeah. So for TPN calculations, we don't necessarily use BMI, we use weight. When adults do it, they have to factor in like fluid overload, like different types of things. For me, when I do it for the neonates, it's obviously different because they're really, really tiny, but basically it's just their weight use. It's not their BMI.
And I'm just curious, is that a whole nother, it has to be, right? A whole nother certification of being licensed to work with neonates and TPN with neonates?
So there are specific credentials, like state exams, that further qualify you to work in those those fields, yes, you don't particularly need one to work in those fields, but typically your dietitians that you see in your ICUs have either like a lot of experience, or they have like a master's degree, or they're like working towards a special certification that goes towards, you know, that type of population.
Okay. And for our viewers out there, TPN, when we refer to that, is the parenteral nutrition. So your carbohydrates, proteins, fats that are being put into your system through a route other than your mouth. So parenteral meaning straight into the gut, and this is just so you get your nutrition on a daily requirement. So definitely a lot of calculations going into that process, and we commend you for being one of the people brave enough to make those calls and those decisions to help neonates in that situation.
Thanks. Yeah, I work closely with pharmacists every single day.
Yeah, we try to math good too.
Yeah, right. So when we talk about carbohydrates and fats, these are macronutrients, as everyone knows. Can you give some insight into the difference between, for the common viewer, what's the difference between a macronutrient and a micronutrient? And what are some, misconceptions people may have about these?
So your macronutrients are going to be your carbohydrates, your fats, and your protein. Your body's, as a general rule of thumb, like main energy sources, with carbs being your main energy source. And then your micronutrients are things like your vitamins and your minerals. And, when we go through school, like there's full nutrition courses dedicated to like your macronutrients and your micronutrients and the metabolism of all of them. But basically, as a general rule of thumb, like I said, your macros give you energy, amongst like they also provide vitamins and minerals, and then your vitamins and minerals, they all work together towards helping your cells function properly, helping your body perform like its daily things, if you will, in its most simplest form.
Do you think micronutrients are overlooked in a person's diet? Do you think a lot of focus, especially on the common person, when they're trying to gain weight, gain muscle, they're always focused on their macros, and the micros may be overlooked, something like their simple vitamins and minerals?
Yeah, they definitely take a little bit of a back burner, but they're just as important. They all work together towards giving you, your best version of health, whatever that is for you. Yeah. So I would say they definitely take a back burner. And, like a lot of the times if you go to a doctor per se, and they'll hit you with like, oh, you need to lose weight, or if you're looking to gain weight, they'll always focus on those macronutrients, but they don't ever talk about with you like the micronutrients. So, but when you seek out like care or help from a dietitian, we'll always include those as part of your overall picture.
That's good.
Yeah, that's really insightful. I feel like a lot of that stuff kind of is misinformed, and most people don't really know like the purpose of the macro versus the purpose of the micro. So what would you say that like you might commonly see in practice, or something that maybe you're just a little more aware of? How would someone be able to determine if they're deficient in a macro or micro, or is there some kind of symptom, for lack of a term?
Yeah, so with your macronutrients, if you're not getting enough of those, basically that's indicative that you're not getting enough food throughout the day. You're not giving your body enough energy. So you're going to feel tired, you're going to feel sluggish, you're going to feel like, it's hard to concentrate, hard to focus, your sex drive might be low. Whereas your micronutrients are a little bit tricky, because micronutrient deficiencies present in like different forms. Some of them, will cause hair loss. Some of them will cause skin changes. Some of them will cause like dry mouth or weird like pattern on your tongue. So those are really different and specific. And it's not hard to get a micronutrient deficiency, but your body works really hard in regulating the levels of your vitamins and minerals. So it's less common than, just not getting enough energy from your macronutrients type of thing.
And while we're on that subject, do you see a lot of, or at least a fair share of the micronutrient toxicities? Do you see those at all?
So I don't I personally have not seen toxicities of them. I mean, and then again, I will say where I work, I regulate those. So for like the neonates, for example, I know how much vitamins and how much minerals they're getting every day. I worked in adult like clinical care briefly, and I didn't see any macronutrient deficiencies, but I mean, micronutrient toxicities, it's common, especially if you're like, sorry, I don't know what she's doing back there.
Okay.
Especially
Okay,
if you're
it's
like
awesome.
taking a bunch of different like vitamins and not having them checked by someone. It can be common. I've just never seen it.
I think this is so interesting because just listening to what you deal with every day and like what you learned in school versus what we learned in school, it's such a team approach when you really start getting into the clinical aspect of diet, exercise. Like you guys probably see so much more diet related information versus we see the pharmacology. And in our lectures, we might have 2 slides on diet and lifestyle, and it says, usually they just say, how do you stop, you know, for the example, like the gout, like how do you stop that or prevent that? And it's like diet. And then they give you like a couple of things. And I know that there's, in our research, there's so many more things that are important to, you know, regulating a disease state or controlling a disease state.
Yeah, I'm kind of jealous how you guys
I
get to
know.
focus on diet and we're with medication. Medication's a math the whole time.
No, but I do agree. It makes all the difference when you take a team approach for things like health. I don't think you can come at health with one specialty and be like, this is it, this is going to solve it. I think it really takes like a bunch of different like interdisciplinary specialties.
So I'm curious, while you were in school, did they push that interdisciplinary approach? Because I know we do. We work with med students and nurses and PT students. We don't get many dietitians, but did you guys have that exposure?
So not as much as I would have hoped.
Yeah.
I hope going forward, like the dietitians to come going through school, it's somewhat of a reform because we didn't really get that. I mean, when we go through our clinical practice supervised setting, you get that in a little bit because when you're in a hospital, you know, you have a bunch of different services who are working with that patient. But the problem is I don't necessarily think that all those people are communicating all the time, especially when, so I did my supervised practice at Tampa General too. So especially when like you're working at a big hospital, like getting all those teams on board is really hard. I will say it's better in ICU settings because there's daily medical rounds, but in school, I didn't have as much as I wish I had.